Joshua David Shapiro, born June 20, 1973, is an American lawyer and politician serving since 2023 as the 48th governor of Pennsylvania. A member of the Democratic Party, he was the 50th Attorney General of Pennsylvania from 2017 to 2023 and served on the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners from 2012 to 2017. Raised in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, Shapiro studied political science at the University of Rochester and earned his Juris Doctor degree from Georgetown University. After that, he worked as a senior advisor to U.S. Senator Robert Torricelli. Shapiro was elected to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 2004, defeating former Republican U.S. Representative John D. Fox. He represented the 153rd District from 2005 to 2012. Shapiro was elected to the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners in 2011, marking the first time Republicans lost control of Montgomery County. Serving on the board from 2011 to 2017, he held the position of chairman, and in 2015 was also appointed chairman of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency by Governor Tom Wolf. Shapiro ran for Pennsylvania Attorney General in 2016, defeating Republican John Rafferty Jr., and was re-elected in 2020. As Attorney General, he released the findings of a statewide grand jury report that revealed the abuse of children by priests and cover-up by church leaders. He also helped negotiate $1 billion for Pennsylvania as part of a national opioid settlement. Shapiro ran for governor of Pennsylvania in the 2022 election. He ran unopposed in the Democratic primary and defeated Republican nominee Doug Mastriano in the general election by a 14.8% margin. Shapiro was reportedly one of the final two contenders in Kamala Harris's vice presidential candidate selection for the 2024 United States presidential election. Early life and education. Shapiro was born on June 20, 1973, in Kansas City, Missouri. He spent a few years of his childhood on a U.S. Navy base where his father, Stephen Shapiro, served as a medical officer before the family moved to Dresher, Pennsylvania, a community in Upper Dublin Township in Montgomery County. His father, Stephen, now works as a pediatrician at Pediatric Medical Associates in East Norriton, Pennsylvania, previously Rydal, Pennsylvania, and his mother, Judy, worked as a teacher. Shapiro was raised in a Jewish household. At age 6, through his synagogue, the Beth Sholom congregation in Elkins Park, and the Foreman Hebrew Day School, he began writing letters to Avi Goldstein, a Soviet Jewish refusenik in Tbilisi, Georgia, and enlisted others in an international pen pal program he called Children for Avi. He attended high school at Akiba Hebrew Academy in Marion Station, Pennsylvania. While in high school, Shapiro spent time volunteering in Israel after he was required to do a service project, which he and his peers completed through a program that took them to a kibbutz in Israel, where he worked on a farm and at a fishery. The program also included service on an army base. He was a basketball team captain during his senior year. Shapiro attended the University of Rochester, majoring in political science. In 1992, he was the first freshman ever elected student body president of the university. He graduated from the University of Rochester magna cum laude in 1995. While working on Capitol Hill, he enrolled at the Georgetown Law Center as an evening student and earned his Juris Doctor in 2002. Early career, Capitol Hill. After graduating from college, Shapiro moved to Washington, D.C. There, he began working in the Public Affairs Department, known as Hasbara, of the Israeli Embassy in April 1996. According to a Shapiro spokesperson, he worked there to get foreign policy experience. His job largely involved educating the public about Israel. In September, he began working for U.S. Representative Peter Deutsch. He also worked as legislative assistant to U.S. Senator Carl Levin and as a senior advisor to U.S. Senator Robert Torricelli. While working for Torricelli, Shapiro planned foreign affairs tours in the Middle East and Asia, including a trip to North Korea. From 1999 to 2003, Shapiro worked as chief of staff to U.S. Representative who represented parts of Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania House of Representatives. In 2004, Shapiro ran for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in the 153rd District. He faced the Republican nominee former Congressman John D. Fox. Shapiro trailed in polling at the beginning of the race, but he knocked on 10,000 doors and ran a campaign centered on increasing education funding and better access to health care. He was elected by a margin of 10 percentage points over Fox. Shapiro was re-elected in 2006, 2008, and 2010. As a member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, he built a reputation as a consensus builder who was willing to work across the aisle on a bipartisan basis. Following the 2006 elections, Democrats controlled the Pennsylvania State House by 1 seat, but the party was unable to unite behind a candidate for Speaker of the House. Shapiro helped broker a deal that resulted in the election of moderate Republican Dennis O'Brien as Speaker of the House. O'Brien subsequently named Shapiro as Deputy Speaker of the House. In 2008, following revelations that Democratic House Minority Leader Bill DeWeese was involved in a corruption scandal, Shapiro called for him to step down, citing him as a symbol of a broken system, and arguing that DeWeese remaining in leadership would hurt Democrats statewide in the 2008 elections. In 2007 and 2009, Shapiro introduced 3 separate bills into the House to divest state funds from Iran and later Sudan. The bill and similar efforts around the country make a moral argument against investing in countries with a history of terror or genocide. The idea of pulling out of companies that do business with Iran is based on earlier such efforts that crippled the apartheid South African government, but thus far, the South African campaign has not been replicated. In 2010, Shapiro, U.S. Senator Bob Casey, and State Representative Dan Frankel pushed for national legislation to allow states' pension funds to divest from business engaging with Iran. While a state representative, Shapiro was one of the first public backers of then-Senator Barack Obama for president in 2008. This was in contrast with much of the Pennsylvania Democratic political establishment, which supported Hillary Clinton in the presidential primary. From 2006 through 2017, Shapiro also practiced corporate law at the firms Stradley, Ronan, Stevens, and Young in Philadelphia. Montgomery County Commissioner Shapiro won election to the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners in 2011. The election marked the first time in history that the Republican Party lost control of the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners. Shapiro chaired the board from 2012 to 2016. Shapiro's commission duties centered on social services and administration. Castor, the only Republican member of the board during Shapiro's tenure, praised Shapiro's work, calling him the best county commissioner I ever knew and very good at arriving at consensus. In 2016, Shapiro voted for an 11% tax increase, which was an average increase of $66 in property taxes. During his tenure, the Board of Commissioners implemented zero-based budgeting and shifted county pension investments from hedge funds to index funds. Democrats retained a majority on Board of Commissioners in the 2015 election, as Shapiro and his running mate, Val Arkush, both won election. In April 2015, Governor Tom Wolf named Shapiro the chair of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. Pennsylvania Attorney General Shapiro announced his candidacy for Pennsylvania Attorney General in January 2016. While he had practiced with Philadelphia's Stradley Ronan firm and chaired the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, he had never served as a prosecutor. Shapiro campaigned on his promise to restore the office's integrity following Kathleen Kane's resignation, and also promised to work to combat the opioid epidemic and gun violence. His campaign was supported by President Barack Obama, presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, and businessman and former mayor of New York City Michael Bloomberg, who was among the largest donors to Shapiro's campaign. He won the Democratic primary for Attorney General in April 2016, defeating Stephen Zappala and John Morganelli with 47% of the vote. In November 2016, Shapiro narrowly defeated the Republican nominee, State Senator John Rafferty Jr., with 51.3% of the vote. Shapiro was re-elected in 2020, defeating Republican nominee Heather Heidelbaugh with 50.9% of the vote. He received 3,461,472 votes, the most of any candidate in Pennsylvania history, and outran Joe Biden in the concurrent presidential election. Tenure before Shapiro took office in 2016, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's Office launched an investigation of allegations of sexual abuse perpetrated by members of the Catholic Church. Shapiro inherited the investigation, and in August 2018, released the results of an extensive grand jury report. The report alleged the sexual abuse of more than 1,000 children by over 300 priests. It prompted similar investigations in other states into the Catholic Church, such as an inquiry launched by then Missouri Attorney General Josh Hawley. In 2017, Shapiro announced the roundup of a $1 million heroin ring under Operation Outfoxed in Luzerne County. One of those arrested was Maura Cathio, previously charged in a major bath salts case in 2016. All the charges in Operation Outfoxed were dismissed after allegations that the Attorney General's office mishandled the sealing of wiretapped recordings. In January 2018, Center County District Attorney Bernard Cantorna referred the case of the death of Tim Piazza, a Penn State student who was hazed, to Shapiro because Cantorna had previously served as a criminal defense attorney for one of the defendants. Multiple defendants pleaded guilty. In early April 2018, Shapiro charged former Bedford County District Attorney William Higgins with 31 counts of misdemeanor corruption, accusing Higgins of soliciting sexual favors from accused criminals in exchange for recommending lenient sentences and revealing the names of police informants. If convicted by a jury on all charges, Higgins would have faced a maximum sentence of 62 years in prison. Instead, in May, Shapiro offered Higgins a plea bargain, which Higgins accepted. He pleaded guilty to all 31 charges in return for a guarantee of no jail time. In August 2018, Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner referred the case of the fatal shooting of Jeffrey Dennis by a Philadelphia police officer to Shapiro because Krasner had previously served as Dennis's criminal defense attorney. Dennis was in his car when he was boxed in by undercover officers in unmarked vehicles. 3 officers were injured after Dennis tried to evade them. In December, Shapiro announced no charges would be filed against the officers, saying, "Violations of police procedure do not always rise to the level of criminal charges." Dennis's family subsequently sued the officer and City of Philadelphia for the incident. In 2019, Shapiro led efforts to ensure that insurance holders of Highmark, a healthcare company, could receive treatment at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. The settlement allowed 1.9 million insurance recipients to continue using their existing doctors as in-plan providers, rather than being forced to switch either medical providers or insurance providers. When serving on the Pennsylvania Board of Pardons as Attorney General in 2019, Shapiro cast the fewest votes in favor of commutation, denying 24 out of 41 pardons and being one of only 2 board members to vote against more cases than in favor. In May 2019, Lancaster County newspaper LNP reported that members of Shapiro's office staff had edited Shapiro's Wikipedia entry to describe him as a rising progressive star who has earned a reputation as a consensus builder eager to take on the status quo and challenge powerful institutions to protect the people of Pennsylvania. Staffers for Auditor General Eugene DePasquale, Senate Minority Leader Jay Costa, and Senate Majority Leader Jake Corman also reportedly edited their boss's Wikipedia pages. The then executive director of the Pennsylvania State Ethics Commission said that he did not see this practice as illegal under the state's ethics law. In December 2019, Shapiro charged State Representative Movita Johnson-Harrell with perjury and theft of funds from her own charity for such things as vacations and clothing. Shapiro was one of 20 electors the Pennsylvania Democratic Party chose to vote in the Electoral College for Joe Biden and his running mate Kamala Harris in 2020 United States presidential election. In 2021, Shapiro announced an opioid settlement with Johnson & Johnson and 3 other U.S. pharmaceutical distributors that resulted in Pennsylvania receiving $1 billion. The settlement resolved thousands of lawsuits against the companies for their role in fueling the opioid epidemic. Shapiro supported enforcing Pennsylvania's anti-boycott law against Ben & Jerry's after the ice cream maker announced that it would not renew its license in the occupied Palestinian territories. Shapiro called BDS a stain that Governor Wolf was right to prevent from taking hold in Pennsylvania, and said it is rooted in anti-Semitism. In July 2021, Shapiro charged State Representative Margot L. Davidson with theft by deception, solicitation to hinder apprehension, and election code violations after stealing from the Commonwealth by filing fraudulent overnight per diem requests and various other expenses through the Pennsylvania House of Representatives Comptroller's Office, as well as hindering a state prosecution. In August 2021, Shapiro settled the largest prevailing wage criminal case in U.S. history. Under the plea, Glenn O. Hawbaker Inc. paid nearly $21 million to 1,267 Pennsylvania workers. Shapiro joined several other state attorneys general in opposing President Donald Trump's travel ban, and also sued Trump to block the implementation of a rule that would have made it easier for employers to deny health insurance coverage of contraceptives. He also joined a lawsuit against ITT Technical Institute, a for-profit educational institute, that resulted in a $168 million settlement, with about $5 million of that going to Pennsylvania students. In 2018, he reached an agreement with federal officials to prevent the distribution of blueprints for 3D printed firearms. In 2019, he came out in support of the legalization of recreational cannabis use by adults, joining Governor Tom Wolf and other leading Pennsylvania Democrats. 2022 Gubernatorial Campaign. Shapiro had long been expected to run for governor of Pennsylvania, and on October 13, 2021, he announced his candidacy in the 2022 election. In January 2022, Shapiro's campaign reported it had $13.4 million in campaign funds, which was described as a record amount for a candidate in an election year. Shapiro faced no opponents in the Democratic primary and secured the nomination on May 17, 2022. He faced Republican nominee Doug Mastriano in the general election. Shapiro ran on a platform of protecting voting rights, abortion rights, and raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. His campaign was criticized by some progressives because of his support for capital punishment for heinous crimes, his public feuds with Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner, and his compromising with police unions to pass police reform bills. Efforts to enlist a progressive primary challenge to Shapiro were unsuccessful. Shapiro later changed his position, now saying he opposes capital punishment and would sign a bill to abolish it. During the lead-up to the primary election, Shapiro's campaign released a statewide televised advertisement calling a Mastriano win a win for what Donald Trump stands for, referencing Mastriano's stance on outlawing abortion and his efforts to audit the 2020 presidential election. The ad was seen as an endorsement of the Republican candidate Shapiro would want to face in the general election, with Mastriano seen as too extreme for swing voters to elect. Mastriano won the Republican primary, and his closest opponent, former Congressman Lou Barletta, later said that Shapiro's ads likely helped. The impact of Shapiro's ads on the primary is disputed, as Mastriano was already in the lead. Platform Shapiro has said that as governor, he would protect abortion access in Pennsylvania and veto any bill the state legislature passes that outlaws abortion. Before running for governor, Shapiro had supported capital punishment for what he called heinous crimes. During his campaign, he announced that he now favored abolishing the death penalty in Pennsylvania, a reversal of his previous position. Shapiro was asked in a 2022 interview with Pennsylvania Capital Star why his position changed, to which he responded, "The question is a fair one. When I ran for Attorney General in 2016, I said that the death penalty should be reserved for the most heinous of crimes. But then I got elected Attorney General, and I saw these cases come across my desk. I got closer to a system that I thought was in need of reform. And as Attorney General, I never once sought the death penalty. As governor, I'd be in a policy-making role, together with the legislature. And I thought it was important, when asked to state my position unequivocally, that I would sign legislation to abolish the death penalty." Shapiro also said he would not sign any future death warrants for prisoners on death row. Shapiro supports cutting Pennsylvania's nearly 10% corporate tax rate to 4% by 2025. He has proposed hiring 2,000 additional police officers across Pennsylvania, saying, "The more police officers we hire, the more opportunities we have for them to get out of their patrol cars, walk the beat, learn the names of the kids in the communities." Shapiro favors pardoning those convicted for possession of small amount of marijuana. On efforts to mitigate COVID-19, Shapiro has broken with some in the Democratic Party and opposes mask and vaccine mandates. He prefers educating the public about vaccines' efficacy. Shapiro is also skeptical about Pennsylvania joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, a market-based program to reduce some greenhouse gas emissions. He has proposed expanding Pennsylvania's clean energy portfolio for utility companies, greater electric car infrastructure, and investing in clean energy research and development. Shapiro supports a Lifeline scholarship bill, which creates education savings accounts for children in failing public schools that can be spent on approved expenses, including tutoring, instructional materials, and private school tuition. Shapiro has proposed a plan that will allow for a $250 gas tax refund per personal passenger vehicle, up to 4 vehicles per household. He proposed funding the proposal with funds from the American Rescue Plan. On the issue of vocational training, Shapiro has proposed increasing career and technical training in high schools, tripling state funding for apprenticeships and union skills programs, and creating a Pennsylvania Office of Workforce Development. He also supports eliminating 4-year degree requirements for state government jobs. Shapiro is a supporter of unions and has vowed to veto any right-to-work legislation. Endorsements and support. Before his announcement, term-limited Governor Tom Wolf endorsed Shapiro. He received endorsements from former Governor Ed Rendell, State Senator Anthony H. Williams, former Pennsylvania Democratic Party Chair Marcel Groen, and the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. He was endorsed by the SEIU Pennsylvania State Council, 4 SEIU local unions consisting of over 80,000 SEIU members in the state. On January 29, 2022, the Pennsylvania Democratic Party endorsed him by voice vote. The committee also endorsed his preferred running mate, State Representative Austin Davis. Other union support included the Philadelphia Carpenters Union and Sheet Metal Workers, the Western Pennsylvania Laborers PAC, and the Electricians Union Local No. 5 in Pittsburgh. 8 former Republican officials, including former Pennsylvania Supreme Court Justice Sandra Schultz Newman and former Congressman Charlie Dent, as well as the sitting Republican chairman of the Lawrence County Board of Commissioners, Morgan Boyd, endorsed Shapiro, with several calling Mastriano extreme and divisive. 7 more former Republican officials, including former U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff, endorsed Shapiro in August 2022 for the same reason. Results: on November 8, 2022, Shapiro defeated Mastriano with 56.5% of the vote to Mastriano's 41.7%. Shapiro carried 17 counties. Governor of Pennsylvania, 2023 present. On January 17, 2023, Shapiro was sworn in on a stack of 3 Hebrew Bibles, including one that was on the bema during the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. Long weaving his Jewish identity into his politics, Shapiro is considered part of the new age of Jewish politicians who are open about their identity. He is the 3rd Jewish governor in the history of Pennsylvania, after Milton Schaap and Ed Rendell. He is also the state's first Generation X governor. Cabinet. On December 6, 2022, during his transition to the governorship, it was reported that Shapiro tapped several of his longtime aides to serve in high-ranking positions, including naming his campaign manager Dana Fritz as his chief of staff. In January 2023, he appointed Akbar Hossain, an executive to his transition team, to be Secretary of Policy and named his longtime aide Mike Vereb to be Secretary of Legislative Affairs. Vereb served in that position until he resigned in late September, after he was accused of sexual harassment of a female staffer. He was replaced by Thomas T.J. Yablonsky, a senior advisor in the governor's office. Shapiro's administration was accused of covering up the sexual harassment incident after it was revealed Vereb had remained in his position months after the accusations were made. Shapiro defended his administration's actions, saying that an investigation into the allegations against Vereb is underway. He added, "Obviously these investigations, and again, I'm speaking generally, and I think it's really important that you understand that these things don't happen overnight. They can be lengthy processes. But it's important, and I know this from my time as Attorney General advocating for victims, it's really important to make sure that everyone be heard and that the process be thorough and complete. Weeks later, Spotlight PA revealed that 3 weeks before Vereb's resignation, Shapiro's administration had reached a settlement for $295,000 with Vereb's accusers that included a clause preventing all parties involved from publicly discussing its details. Economy in 2023, Shapiro proposed raising Pennsylvania's minimum wage from $7.25 per hour to $15 and lowering corporate income taxes from 8% to 4.99% by 2026. By the end of 2023, Pennsylvania's credit rating had increased from AA to AA, according to Standard & Poor's, Fitch Ratings, and Moody's Investors Service. As governor, Shapiro said he has focused on expanding Pennsylvania's workforce. The day after his inauguration, he signed an executive order eliminating the 4-year college degree requirement for 92% of state government jobs. On July 31st, he issued an executive order establishing the Commonwealth Workers Transformation Program, CWTP, which provides grants to ensure that companies and contractors have the skilled workforce required. As part of the program, as much as $400 million could be used for workforce training in Pennsylvania until 2028. In August, Shapiro eliminated the college education requirement for state police cadets. In March 2024, he issued a directive increasing Pennsylvania's use of project labor agreements, PLAs. In May, he issued an executive order establishing the Hire, Improve, Recruit, Empower, Hire Committee to attempt to fill in roughly 600 open positions in the state government. In February 2024, Shapiro unveiled his proposed $48.3 billion state budget for the 2024 and 2025 fiscal year, mostly consisting of funding public schools, public transit, higher education, and infrastructure, with tax collections projected to increase by $1 billion. Critics argued that the budget would inflate the state's deficit to over $6 billion by 2028 and lead to large tax increases. Ultimately, Shapiro rolled back some of his proposals and signed a $47.6 billion budget in July. Shapiro reiterated his support for aggressive corporate tax cuts at an event with Janet Yellen in July 2024. Education. During the drafting of Pennsylvania's state budget in mid-2023, Shapiro supported a Republican-led school choice proposal that would distribute $100 million to families for private school tuition instead of sending their children to public schools. He later dropped his support to avoid a protracted budget delay after Democrats in the state house refused to support it. The next year, Shapiro proposed a $1.1 billion boost for public school operations and instruction during the drafting of the 2024 budget, a 14% increase from the previous year. Through the 2024 budget, about $144 million would financially aid students, a roughly 33% increase, some through existing programs and some through new efforts. A new state board of higher education was established that created performance-based criteria for funding state-related universities. Transportation. In February 2023, Shapiro criticized the management of the Norfolk Southern Railway after it failed to contact Pennsylvania officials following the derailment of a train carrying harmful chemicals in Ohio, adjacent to the Pennsylvania border. He called for the railway company to take a safer overall approach and called on the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration to revisit the need for more advanced safety and braking equipment in trains. On June 11, 2023, Shapiro issued a disaster emergency proclamation after part of Interstate 95 collapsed in Philadelphia. As much as $7 million in state funds were provided for reconstruction work. The proclamation also authorized the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, and the Pennsylvania State Police to use available resources to respond to the collapse. Under Shapiro's leadership, the collapsed portion of I-95 was rebuilt in less than 2 weeks. Shapiro received praise for his response to the collapse. President Biden said that Shapiro did one heck of a job in responding to the collapse. Minority Leader Brian J. O'Neill of the Philadelphia City Council said, "You couldn't ask for more from the governor. A Quinnipiac University poll found that 74% of statewide voters approved of Shapiro's handling of the crisis. Shapiro proposed investing $282.8 million, a 1.75% increase, in funding for public transit systems in the 2024 budget, which would generate $1.5 billion for transit funding until 2029. The initial funding proposal was dropped from the budget in July, and SEPTE was given an $80.5 million budget extension to keep it solvent until the fall legislative session. Immigration. In January and February 2024, the Republican-controlled state Senate urged Shapiro to send the Pennsylvania National Guard to the U.S. southern border to help Texas resolve the growing numbers of migrants entering the country, but he declined to do so. In March, after the Senate passed a resolution to send troops to the border, a spokesperson for the governor's office said that it was up to Congress, not Shapiro, to resolve the issue. Crime. In December 2023, Shapiro signed into law a bipartisan bill to restrict the kinds of activities that are considered violations of parole. At the bill signing ceremony, he stood next to rapper Meek Mill, who was sent to prison on a parole violation for doing a wheelie on a dirt bike. In his second month in office, Shapiro pledged to continue the pause on state-level executions Governor Wolf had maintained. He also called on the Pennsylvania General Assembly to abolish the death penalty. In 2024, Shapiro filed a brief in support of an Allegheny County inmate appealing his life without parole sentence. The inmate, Derek Lee, was convicted of second-degree murder for the actions of his accomplice during a burglary. Other issues. In August 2023, Shapiro announced his administration would end Pennsylvania's nearly 30-year contract with Real Alternatives, an anti-abortion nonprofit that funds anti-abortion counseling centers and maternity homes. Shapiro said he decided to end the contract to better defend abortion access in the state. On September 19, 2023, Shapiro announced Pennsylvania would enact automatic voter registration effective immediately. The process will include voter registration when voting-eligible persons receive their driver's licenses, with the choice to opt out. Shapiro condemned the attempted assassination of Donald Trump at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, where a stray bullet killed one rally-goer. Shapiro said the man died a hero, protecting his family at the rally, and ordered that flags be flown at half-mast in his honor. President Biden's faltering June 2024 debate performance against Trump sparked speculation about whether Shapiro might mount a bid for the Democratic presidential nomination should Biden drop out of the race. Shapiro denied any interest in running for president and declared his continued support for Biden. After Biden eventually withdrew, Shapiro endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris, Biden's pick to replace him, and encouraged Democrats to unite in supporting Harris. His quick endorsement of Harris led to speculation that Shapiro could become her running mate. Views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Shapiro's history of support for Israel received renewed attention due to his prominence as a potential vice presidential pick in 2024. Shapiro's supporters allege that his critics unfairly scrutinized his position on the conflict due to his Jewish identity. Critics of Shapiro rejected this assertion, pointing to the relative lack of criticism leveled at J.B. Pritzker, another possible Harris running mate who is Jewish, and insisting that the differences between Shapiro's stance and those of governors such as Tim Walz and Andy Beshear are more pronounced than his supporters claim. During high school, Shapiro spent 5 months studying in Israel and volunteering for the Israel Defense Forces. In 1993, he published in the Campus Times student newspaper an op-ed titled "Peace Not Possible," in which he claimed that peace will never come to the Middle East. The Philadelphia Inquirer quoted it as follows: "Palestinians will not coexist peacefully. They do not have the capabilities to establish their own homeland and make it successful even with the aid of Israel and the United States. They are too battle-minded to be able to establish a peaceful homeland of their own." He also wrote that he believed then-Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat was in danger of being assassinated by his fellow belligerent Arabs. In 2024, a spokesperson for Shapiro said that Shapiro's position had changed since he wrote the op-ed and that he now supports a two-state solution. In the 1993 article, Shapiro called himself a past volunteer in the Israeli army who had spent 5 months studying in the country. Manuel Bonder, a spokesperson for Shapiro, also spoke with the Times of Israel to clarify his volunteer work in Israel and said that while in high school, Shapiro completed a service project with other classmates at a kibbutz that included volunteering on a military base operated by the Israel Defense Forces. He clarified that Shapiro was at no time engaged in any military activities. In 1996, Shapiro spent 6 months working for the Hasbara, Public Affairs, Department of the Israeli Embassy in Washington, D.C. Shapiro has supported cutting off state ties with entities that engage in boycotts of Israel, such as the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions (BDS) movement, or of Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. In 2021, after Ben & Jerry's announced that it planned to end sales in Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, while seeking to continue sales in Israel through a different arrangement, Shapiro reportedly supported calls to utilize Pennsylvania's anti-BDS law on Ben & Jerry's. At the time, he said that BDS was rooted in anti-Semitism and praised Pennsylvania's anti-BDS law, which was signed 5 years earlier. The organizations J Street and Teruah have opposed similar laws on the ground that they violate the First Amendment. In 2024, according to a spokesperson, he pledged to sign a bill to block state funding of colleges and universities that engage in a boycott or divestment from Israel, a term the bill defines to include any activity intended to financially penalize the state of Israel. Shapiro has repeatedly voiced support for Israel in the Israel-Hamas war. He called on people and governments to condemn the 2023 Hamas-led attack on Israel, calling it a moment to recognize what is so clearly wrong, the acts of Hamas, and what is right, and that is Israel, our key ally's right to defend herself in the face of this barbarism. Shapiro faced criticism for his remarks in a letter written by KIR and signed by 43 Pennsylvania Muslim organizations, which said that Shapiro did not recognize the structural root causes of the conflict and chose to intentionally ignore the civilian loss of life in Gaza. In an interview, Shapiro agreed that the Palestinian population is distinct from Hamas and said, "There are so many peace-loving Arabs and peace-loving people in that region. No question." On December 3, 2023, a pro-Palestinian protest accused Jewish-owned Philadelphia restaurant Goldie of supporting the alleged genocide of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip by sending the restaurant's profits to a provider of protective gear and training for the Israel Defense Forces during the war. Shapiro visited the restaurant in a show of support and said, "The purposeful gathering of a mob outside of a restaurant simply because it is owned by a Jewish person, well, that's anti-Semitism, plain and simple." He also criticized University of Pennsylvania President Liz McGill for failure of leadership and pressured the university to compel her resignation after she sidestepped questions during the 2023 United States Congress hearing on anti-Semitism. On December 13th, Shapiro gave more detailed remarks on the war, saying, "Israel not only has a right, they have a responsibility to rid the region of Hamas and the terror that Hamas can perpetrate." He called on the U.S. to help support the Israeli people once the battle is over in finding their footing again. In a March 2024 interview, Shapiro voiced sympathy for Palestinian civilians and peaceful protesters, saying, "We also can't ignore the death and the destruction that's occurred in Gaza. For those who are peacefully protesting, I support their right to do that and I'll defend that, and I want to make sure they feel heard. And I think in Pennsylvania they do feel heard." In April 2024, Shapiro condemned pro-Palestinian protests at American colleges after a prominent rabbi at Columbia University urged Jewish students to leave campus and said the university could not guarantee their safety. He called on local officials to step in and enforce the law to protect students. Shapiro has been accused of comparing protesters to white supremacists and the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, saying that demonstrators were not, by any stretch, all anti-Semitic, but suggesting that anti-Semitic speech is treated more leniently than white supremacist speech, and comparing students allegedly being blocked from going to campus just because they're Jewish to the actions of the KKK, saying, "We have to be careful about setting any kind of double standard when responding to the conduct of far-right and pro-Palestinian demonstrators. Those defending Shapiro's comments observed that he had made the KKK comparisons specifically about those who had called for the deaths of Jews, not all pro-Palestinian protesters, and that he supported peaceful demonstrators. Shapiro said, "It's right for young people to righteously protest and question." In May 2024, Shapiro called for a police crackdown on the pro-Palestinian encampment at the University of Pennsylvania, but later said he was already aware of police plans to disband the encampment after police made arrests less than 24 hours after Shapiro's statement. Critics of Shapiro have said that he has exaggerated and misrepresented the threat student demonstrators posed to their peers. Raphael Shamunov wrote, "The leap of logic in which Shapiro engaged by suggesting they posed a threat to Jewish safety relies on a perception of Jews who are pro-Palestinian as less Jewish than Jews who are pro-Israel, and a belief that any ideological disagreement with pro-Israel Jews is a kind of violence." First Amendment advocates have criticized Shapiro for a revision to the state employees' code of conduct prohibiting scandalous behavior. Pro-Palestinian and Muslim groups raised concerns that the order was intended to chill speech related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One First Amendment lawyer from Bryn Mawr called the regulation impossible to adhere to because it's impossible to understand what it applies to. Shapiro's views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have changed over time. Most recently, Shapiro has said he favors an immediate two-state solution and called Netanyahu one of the worst leaders of all time. Personal life. Shapiro met his wife, Lori, in 9th grade as they both attended Akiba Hebrew Academy, now Jack M. Barrack Hebrew Academy, then in Marion Station. They dated in high school and reconnected after college while both were living in Washington, D.C. Shapiro proposed to her in Jerusalem in 1997. They married on May 25th of that year. Shapiro and his wife have 4 children and reside in the governor's residence in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Shapiro is an observant conservative Jew who keeps kosher. Electoral History Publications articles. We fixed I-95 in 12 days. Here are our lessons for U.S. infrastructure. The Washington Post, July 16, 2023. See also List of Jewish American jurists. Notes references. External links. Governor Josh Shapiro official government website. Josh Shapiro for Governor campaign website. Appearances on C-SPAN profile at Vote Smart.